know how some nights at work stick with you forever? I'm talking about the kind that changes everything you thought you knew about the world. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, but I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I was a police officer then, been on the force for about 8 years, thought I'd seen everything. Domestic disputes, drug busts, bar fights, car accidents, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that October night. It started like any other shift. Me and my partner were cruising around the quieter parts of the county, just past midnight. The radio had been pretty quiet all evening, which is usually a good thing in our line of work. But then dispatch crackled to life with one of those calls that immediately puts you on edge. A woman had called in, completely frantic according to the dispatcher. She was holed up in her RV somewhere on the outskirts of town, near the forest boundary where most folks don't live. She claimed someone was trying to break into her trailer, clawing at the door and calling for her to come out. But here's the thing that got our attention. She said the voice sounded all wrong, like it wasn't quite human. The call had cut off abruptly, which never means anything good. My partner looked at me with that expression we both knew well. These kinds of calls in remote areas usually meant trouble. Could be domestic violence, could be someone having a mental health crisis, could be drugs involved, or it could be something worse. We radioed back that we were responding and started heading toward the location dispatch had given us. The drive out there took about 10 minutes, but it felt longer. We left the main roads behind pretty quickly and found ourselves on these narrow dirt paths that barely qualified as streets. No streetlights, no houses visible, just thick trees pressing in on both sides. The headlights cut through the darkness, but everything beyond that cone of light felt like it was watching us. My partner was driving, and I could tell he was feeling the same unease I was. We'd both responded to calls in remote areas before, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the way the woman had sounded on the phone, or maybe it was just the complete isolation of where we were heading. Either way, we were both on high alert. When we finally reached the location, the first thing that struck me was how quiet everything was. I mean, dead quiet. No wind in the trees, no insects, no distant highway noise. Just this heavy silence that seemed to press against your eardrums. And there, about 50 yards ahead, sat the RV. The door was hanging wide open and warm light was spilling out into the darkness. That's never a good sign. We parked our cruiser at a distance and approached on foot, hands resting on our weapons but not drawn yet. Protocol is to announce yourself first, try to get a response, see what you're dealing with. But as we got closer, we could see why nobody was answering our calls. The door frame was torn up something fierce. Long scratches gouged deep into the metal, like someone had taken a garden rake to it. But these weren't made by any tool I'd ever seen. They looked more like claw marks, but bigger and deeper than anything a dog or even a bear could make. We drew our weapons then and began clearing the RV. It wasn't a large space, but we went through it methodically, checking every corner and closet. What we found inside made my stomach turn. The place was trashed, like there'd been one hell of a fight. Furniture was overturned, dishes smashed on the floor, pictures knocked off the walls. But it was the other stuff that really got to me. There was this strange liquid all over the linoleum floor near the door, thick and clear, almost like egg whites, but with this weird smell that reminded me of raw meat left out too long. I'd never seen anything like it before, and I've been to plenty of crime scenes. It was pooled in several spots, like whatever had left it behind had been moving around the small space. The bedroom area was even worse. Someone had torn through the dresser drawers, pulling clothes out and throwing them everywhere. But it looked frantic, desperate, like someone searching for something specific or maybe trying to pack in a hurry. The bed was unmade, sheets pulled halfway off and twisted up like someone had been dragged from it. That's when we noticed the back door was also open. We'd missed it on our initial sweep because it was on the other side of the trailer from where we'd entered. My partner went to check it while I continued documenting what we had found inside. He called me over with this tone in his voice that I'd learned to recognize over the years. When he uses that particular pitch, it means he's found something that's going to complicate our night significantly. I stepped outside and immediately saw what had caught his attention. The ground behind the RV was soft from recent rain, and there in the mud were drag marks. Not footprints exactly, but these long grooves like someone had been pulled across the dirt. They led away from the trailer and into the tree line about 30 feet away. There were also what looked like footprints, but they were strange. Too long, too narrow, with what might have been claw marks at the tips. We called it in immediately. Possible kidnapping, victim potentially dragged into the woods, requesting backup and search teams. But dispatch told us the nearest units were at least 20 minutes out and they couldn't get search and rescue mobilized until dawn. If someone was out there hurt or in danger, 20 minutes might be too long. So we made the decision to follow the trail ourselves, at least until backup arrived. I know some people might think that was stupid, going into dark woods after what might be a dangerous suspect, but you have to understand, this is what we trained for. Someone might be dying out there while we waited for help. We grabbed our flashlights and started following the drag marks into the forest. The trees closed around us pretty quickly, blocking out what little moonlight there was. Our flashlight beams seemed pathetically small against all that darkness, like trying to light up a cathedral with birthday candles. For the first 100 yards or so, the trail was easy to follow. The drag marks were clear in the soft earth, and there were broken branches and disturbed undergrowth marking the path. But then we hit a patch of rocky ground, and the signs just disappeared. We swept our lights back and forth, looking for any indication of which direction to go, but found nothing. My partner suggested we split up to cover more ground, but I shut that down immediately. Rule 1 of search and rescue, never separate in unknown terrain, especially at night. So we stuck together and tried to guess which way the trail might continue. The forest seemed to grow denser as we pushed deeper into it. Trees that had looked normal from the outside now appeared twisted and wrong in our flashlight beams. Their bark was scarred with deep gouges, like something with massive claws had been using them as scratching posts. Some of the scratches were old, grown over with new bark, but others looked fresh, oozing sap that gleamed black in our lights. We found the first bone about 50 yards past where the trail had vanished. It was small, maybe from a rabbit or squirrel, but it had been cleaned completely. Not like it had been gnawed by scavengers, but like something had methodically stripped every scrap of meat from it. The bone itself was arranged carefully on a flat rock, positioned just so in a way that made it obvious someone or something had placed it there intentionally. My partner made a joke about it being some kind of nature shrine, but his voice was shaky. We both knew that animals don't arrange bones like that. Animals don't create displays. 20 feet further, we found another one. This time it was bigger, looked like it might have come from a deer. Same thing though, completely clean, positioned deliberately on another flat stone. Then another, and another. A trail of bones leading deeper into the woods, each one placed with careful precision like markers on a path. The smell hit us around the same time we started finding the bones, sweet and rotten like meat left out in the sun for days. But underneath that was something else. Something chemical and wrong that made my nose burn and my eyes water. My partner pulled his shirt up over his nose, and I did the same, but it didn't help much. We kept following the bone trail because we didn't have any better options. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and get out of those woods, but the thought of that woman from the RV being hurt or killed kept me moving forward. If someone was out there using her as bait to lure people into the forest, we had to stop them. That's when we started noticing the trees themselves were wrong, not just the claw marks, but the way they grew. Some of them were bent at impossible angles, twisted around each other like they'd been braided together while they were still young. Others had branches that didn't make sense, growing downward instead of up, or sprouting from the trunk in spirals that hurt to look at. And there were symbols carved into some of the bark, not letters or numbers, nothing that looked like any language I'd ever seen. Just these deep, angular cuts that formed patterns that made my head ache when I tried to focus on them. They looked old, the bark grown over them in places, but they were still visible in the beam of our flashlights. My partner stopped at one tree that had been completely stripped of bark from about waist height up to the lowest branches. The exposed wood underneath was covered in those strange symbols, carved so deep they'd probably killed the tree. But it was still alive somehow, still had leaves on its branches, even though by all rights it should have been dead. We heard the first whisper maybe 10 minutes after we started finding the bones. Just a sound at the edge of hearing, like wind through leaves, but there wasn't any wind that night. We both stopped and listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but it seemed to drift around us, first from the left, then from behind, then from somewhere above us in the canopy. It took a few minutes before we realized the whispers were words. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely words. Spoken in a voice that might have been human once, but wasn't anymore. Like someone had forgotten how to use their vocal cords properly and was having to relearn from scratch. My partner grabbed my arm and pointed up into the trees. There, about 20 feet above us, something was moving through the branches. At first, I thought it might be a large bird, but the way it moved was all wrong. It flowed from branch to branch like liquid, never making a sound, never disturbing the leaves. And it was following us, keeping pace as we moved along the forest floor. We tried to get a better look at it with our flashlights, but every time we pointed them up, the thing would already be somewhere else. Like it could sense where we were looking and moved just fast enough to stay out of our beams. All we could make out were glimpses, something pale and thin, too long to be human, with too many joints in its limbs. The whispers got louder as we went deeper into the woods and more numerous. What had started as a single voice became 2, then 3, then so many I couldn't count them all speaking that same, not quite language, all coming from different directions, some from above, some from behind trees, some from what sounded like underground. That's when we started noticing the clothes. At first, it was just a single shirt hanging from a low branch, maybe 10 feet off the path we'd been following. It was torn and dirty, like it had been out there for a while. We marked the location and kept moving, thinking maybe it was just random litter. But then we found another one, this time a pair of jeans draped over a fallen log, then a jacket tied around a tree trunk like some kind of flag. The deeper we went, the more clothes we found. Shirts, pants, underwear, socks, all of them hanging from branches or draped over rocks like some kind of twisted laundry line. And all of them were filthy, stained with mud and something that looked like old blood. Dark brown stains that had set in long ago. We radioed our location and what we were finding. Dispatch acknowledged, but told us backup was still 15 minutes out. The whole situation was getting stranger by the minute, but we couldn't just turn back. Not if there was someone out there who needed help. The ground around the stream was torn up like something heavy had thrashed around in the mud. The water itself looked wrong too, darker than it should have been, with an oily film on the surface that reflected our lights in rainbow patterns. When I knelt down to get a closer look, I could see things floating in it. Not leaves or debris, but what looked like clumps of hair and small fragments of cloth. The footprints we found were human, but they told a disturbing story. Some were normal, the kind you'd expect from someone walking through the woods. But mixed in with those were others that didn't make sense. Prints that started out human but seemed to change as they went. becoming longer, developing what looked like claw marks at the toes, like someone was transforming as they walked. We followed the mixed trail for another 15 minutes, and the whispers in the trees got louder. They weren't random sounds anymore. I could pick out actual words sometimes, though they were in that strange, not quite language. But every now and then, I'd catch something that sounded almost like English. Names, maybe, or pleas for help, spoken in voices that sounded human but wrong. My partner stopped suddenly and grabbed my shoulder, pointing to something off the trail. There, hanging from a low branch, was a child's jacket. Bright red, the kind a parent would buy so their kid would be visible in the woods. But it was torn and stained, and when we got closer with our lights, we could see that the stains were definitely blood. Under the jacket was a small shoe, then another piece of clothing, this one from an adult. Then more shoes, different sizes, arranged in a neat line leading away from the stream. It was like someone had been collecting trophies, laying them out in a deliberate pattern. The worst part was that some of the clothes looked recent. Not months or years old, but fresh, like they'd been placed there within the last few days. One jacket still had a wallet in the pocket, and when I checked the ID, it belonged to a man who'd been reported missing just 3 weeks ago. He'd gone hiking alone about 30 miles from here and never came back. We radioed in the find, but our signal was getting weaker the deeper we went into the woods. Dispatch acknowledged, but said backup was still 10 minutes out. My partner wanted to turn back, wait for the cavalry. But I kept thinking about that woman from the RV. If she was still alive out here, 10 minutes might be too long. The trail of clothes led us up a steep slope covered in loose rocks and fallen logs. Every step seemed to echo in the unnatural quiet, and I was sure that whatever lived in these woods could hear us coming from miles away. The whispers had stopped, which somehow made everything feel more ominous than when we could hear them. At the top of the ridge, we found the source of at least some of the smell. There was a clearing there, maybe 50 feet across, where nothing grew. The ground was black and looked burnt, like something had scorched it so badly that nothing would ever grow there again. And scattered around the edges were bones, lots of bones, not arranged like the ones we'd found earlier, but just thrown around randomly. Rib cages, skulls, long bones from arms and legs, all mixed together like they'd been tossed there by something that didn't care about being neat anymore. Some were old, yellowed, and cracked with age. Others looked fresh, still showing signs of tissue that hadn't fully decomposed. In the center of the clearing was a pile of rocks arranged in a rough circle, like a primitive fire pit. But instead of ashes, the inside was filled with more of that strange liquid we had found in the RV. It was pooled there like water, but it moved wrong, flowing in patterns that seemed to have nothing to do with gravity or wind. My partner was taking pictures with his phone, documenting the scene for the investigation. That's when we heard the first normal-sounding voice in over an hour, a woman crying for help somewhere in the trees on the far side of the clearing. We moved toward the sound, weapons drawn but not wanting to scare whoever was out there if they were genuinely in distress. The voice got clearer as we approached, and it sounded young, terrified, exactly what you'd expect from someone who had been dragged into these woods against their will. But as we got closer, something about it started bothering me. The timing was too perfect, the words too clear. After an hour of whispers and strange sounds, suddenly we find someone who sounds completely normal, calling for help at exactly the right moment to draw us deeper into the woods. That's when I started noticing the footprints again, not the mixed ones from before, but perfect human prints leading away from where the voice was coming from. Too perfect, like someone had taken great care to make them look exactly right. And they were spaced too evenly, like whoever made them was concentrating on each step instead of walking naturally. The voice called out again, closer now, and I could hear that it was moving. Parallel to us, staying just out of sight behind the trees. My partner wanted to answer, to let whoever it was know that help was coming, but something told me to keep quiet. We followed the sound through another patch of dense undergrowth, and that's when we found the second clearing. This one was smaller, maybe 20 feet across, but it had been used more recently. There were the remains of a campfire in the center, still warm to the touch. Around it were more personal effects: a backpack, hiking boots, a sleeping bag that had been torn to shreds. The voice was coming from the trees just beyond the clearing now, and for the first time I could make out actual words. A woman saying she was hurt, asking for someone to help her. But there was something off about the pronunciation, like someone who'd learned English as a second language but never quite got the rhythm right. That's when we saw her finally stepping out from behind a large oak tree at the edge of the clearing. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair that hung down to her shoulders. Pretty face, the kind that would turn heads on a college campus. She was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, both clean despite supposedly being lost in the woods. No scratches on her arms or face, no dirt on her clothes, nothing to suggest she'd been running through the forest for hours. But it was her eyes that made my stomach drop. They were too bright, reflecting our flashlight beams like mirrors. And when she smiled at us, that big, grateful smile you'd expect from someone who'd just been rescued. There was something wrong with her teeth, too many of them and too sharp. She started walking toward us with those strange gliding steps, and I noticed her feet weren't quite touching the ground. She was moving like she was floating just above the forest floor, like gravity didn't apply to her the same way it did to everything else. My partner called out to her, asking if she was okay, telling her we were police officers and we were there to help. She nodded and kept smiling, but didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had that same hollow quality I'd noticed before, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside a cave. She was standing in a small clearing, maybe 30 yards ahead, just at the edge of our vision. Young woman, probably in her 20s, with long, dark hair. She was facing away from us, and she seemed to be talking to herself, making those strange, almost words we'd been hearing. We switched our flashlights back on and announced ourselves, guns drawn but pointed at the ground. Standard procedure for approaching a potential victim or witness. We called out, asking her to raise her hands and identify herself, asking if she was the one who'd called about the break-in at the RV. When she turned around, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Perfect features, clear skin, the kind of face you'd see in magazines. But her expression was all wrong. She was smiling, but it was too wide, showing too many teeth. Her eyes were reflecting our flashlight beams like an animal's would, giving off this pale green shine. She didn't raise her hands like we'd asked. Instead, she just kept smiling that too big smile and started walking toward us with these weird, gliding steps that didn't look quite right. Like she was floating just above the ground instead of actually walking on it. My partner called out again, more firmly this time, telling her to stop and identify herself. That's when she finally spoke, and what she said made sense. But the way she said it made my skin crawl. She told us she wasn't the one who'd called about the break-in. Said it was her older sister who had some mental health issues and had wandered off into the forest. She was out here looking for her, trying to bring her home safely. The words themselves were reasonable, exactly the kind of explanation you might expect in a situation like this. But everything about how she delivered them was wrong. Her voice had this hollow quality, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. She'd pause in weird places, emphasize the wrong syllables, and that smile never left her face. Not for a second. Even when she was talking about her supposedly missing sister, she kept grinning like she'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. I exchanged a look with my partner. We were both thinking the same thing. Something was seriously off about this woman. But we couldn't just leave her out here alone, and we couldn't abandon our search for the original victim. So I made a decision that I've regretted every day since. I told my partner to escort her back to the RV for questioning while I continued searching the area. It seemed like the logical thing to do at the time. Get her somewhere safe and well lit where we could figure out what was really going on while still maintaining our search for whoever might be hurt or kidnapped. My partner didn't like the idea. I could see it in his face, the way his jaw tightened when I suggested it. But he was a good cop, followed orders, trusted my judgment. He holstered his weapon and approached the woman, speaking in calm, professional tones about escorting her back to safety. She went with him willingly, still wearing that unsettling smile, still moving with those strange, gliding steps. I watched them disappear through the trees, my partner's flashlight beam bouncing as they made their way back toward the RV. Then I was alone in the woods with just my flashlight and an increasingly bad feeling about everything. I should have gone with them. I should have insisted we all stick together, protocol be damned. But I didn't, and that decision has haunted me every night since. I continued following what I thought might be the trail, looking for any sign of the original victim. The forest seemed to close in around me once I was alone, shadows shifting and dancing at the edge of my vision. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me spin around, hand on my weapon. For about 10 minutes, everything was quiet except for the normal sounds you'd expect in a forest at night. Owls in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the leaves. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe we'd overreacted to the situation. That's when I heard the first growl. It came from somewhere off to my left, low and rumbling, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, but definitely not human either. I froze, listening hard, trying to pinpoint where it had come from. My hand was back on my weapon, and every nerve in my body was suddenly screaming danger. Then I heard voices, human voices, but wrong somehow, like the woman's had been. Multiple people talking, but the words were all mixed up, overlapping and contradicting each other. It sounded like a dozen different conversations happening at once, all coming from the same source. I tried to radio my partner, but all I got was static. Sometimes that happens in heavy forest cover. Radio signals can get blocked by the terrain. But it still made me nervous, being out there alone with no way to communicate. The voices were getting closer, moving through the trees somewhere ahead of me. I clicked off my flashlight and crouched behind a fallen log, trying to stay hidden while I figured out what I was dealing with. The smart thing would have been to retreat, go back to the RV, and wait for backup. But I kept thinking about that woman from the original call, wondering if she was still out there somewhere, hurt and scared. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a pale shape moving between the trees, barely visible in the scattered moonlight. I thought it might be another person, maybe wearing light-colored clothes. But as it got closer, I could see that wasn't right at all. It was roughly human-shaped, but everything about it was wrong. Too tall, maybe 7 feet or more. Too thin, like someone had stretched a normal person on a rack. Its skin was pale white, almost glowing in the darkness, and completely hairless. No clothes, just that smooth, waxy-looking skin covering a frame that bent and moved in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at. But the worst part was the face, or where face should have been. It had features, sort of. Eyes, nose, mouth. But they kept shifting and changing like they were made of clay that hadn't dried yet. One second it looked almost human, the next it was something else entirely. And its hands weren't hands at all, but these long, spindly things that ended in claws like black knives. It was making the voices I'd been hearing, all of them at once. Men's voices, women's voices, children's voices, all coming from that shifting mouth like a broken radio picking up multiple stations. And it was looking for something or someone, its head swiveled back and forth as it moved, those unstable eyes scanning the forest. I knew what it was looking for. Me. I stayed as still as I could behind that log, barely breathing, praying it would pass by without noticing me. But luck wasn't on my side that night. It stopped about 20 feet away and turned in my direction, those horrible shifting eyes fixed on my hiding spot. And that mouth opened in something that might have been a smile if smiles could drive you insane. It let out this sound, part growl, part scream, part something I don't have words for. Then it came for me. I rolled out from behind the log and came up with my service weapon drawn, putting 3 round center mass as fast as I could pull the trigger. The bullets hit it, I'm sure of that. I saw the impacts, saw it stagger backward, but it didn't go down, didn't even seem particularly bothered by being shot. Instead, it circled around to my left, moving with this unnatural speed that made it hard to track. I kept firing, trying to lead my shots, but it was like trying to hit smoke. Every time I thought I had a bead on it, it would shift direction or just seem to phase through the trees. It was trying to flank me, get behind me where I couldn't see it coming. I kept rotating, keeping my back to a large oak tree so it couldn't surprise me from behind. My magazine was getting low, and I was starting to panic. This thing wasn't following any rules I understood about how living creatures were supposed to work. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it backed off. It retreated into the deeper shadows between the trees, and those horrible voices faded to whispers and then to nothing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, gun raised, waiting for it to come back. When I was sure it was gone, I tried radioing for backup again. This time I got through, and dispatch told me units were en route, maybe 5 minutes out. I gave them my approximate location and told them to approach with extreme caution. I didn't try to explain what I'd seen. I'm not sure I could have found the words anyway. I started making my way back toward the RV, moving carefully and keeping my weapon ready. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the gun steady, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding that pale, shifting thing. When the backup units finally arrived, their sirens and flashing lights were the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. 3 patrol cars and a sergeant I knew from the station. They found me about halfway back to the RV, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, I guess I had. The first question they asked was where my partner was. He was supposed to be at the RV with the woman we'd found, I told them. But they said they'd already checked the RV and it was empty. No sign of my partner, no sign of the woman, nothing but that mess we'd found earlier. We tried raising him on the radio, but all we got was static. Dead air, like his radio wasn't even turned on. That's when the real panic set in. My partner was missing, along with a woman who may or may not have been connected to the original incident. We spent the rest of the night searching. More units arrived, along with search and rescue teams once the sun came up. K-9 units, helicopters, volunteers from town. We covered every square mile of forest in a 5-mile radius. We found more of those clothes hanging in the trees, scattered throughout the woods like some kind of twisted art installation. Some of them had blood on them, old and dried, but blood nonetheless. But we never found my partner. We never found the woman from the RV. We never found any trace of where they might have gone or what might have happened to them. It was like they just vanished into thin air. The official report listed my partner as missing, presumed dead. The RV incident was classified as a possible kidnapping with unknown suspects. The blood on the clothes was tested, but it didn't match any missing persons in the database. The case went cold within a month. I tried to tell people what I'd seen out there, that thing with the shifting face and the claws. But how do you explain something like that? How do you put in a police report that you were attacked by something that shouldn't exist? Most people figured I'd had some kind of breakdown, maybe hallucinated the whole thing due to stress and trauma. Maybe they were right. Maybe what I saw wasn't real. Maybe it was just my mind trying to process something too horrible to understand properly. But I know what I experienced that night, and I know my partner didn't just disappear into nothing. The department gave me counseling, paid leave, all the support they could offer. But I couldn't go back to patrol work after that. Couldn't drive down dark roads or respond to calls in remote areas without seeing that pale, shifting face in every shadow. I transferred to desk duty for a while, then finally left the force altogether. I've spent a lot of time since then reading about similar incidents, stories from other cops and park rangers and hunters who claim they've encountered things that don't fit into our normal understanding of the world. They call them by different names: skinwalkers, fleshgates, wendigos, mimics. But they all share certain characteristics: the ability to imitate human appearance and speech, the wrong movements, the sense of something fundamentally alien wearing a human mask. Most people dismiss these stories as folklore, urban legends, the overactive imaginations of people who spend too much time alone in the wilderness. And maybe that's what they are. Maybe what happened to me that night was just a combination of stress, darkness, and fear, creating something that wasn't really there. But I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night remembering that smile. Too wide, too many teeth, reflecting our flashlight beams like mirrors. I remember those voices, all talking at once, mimicking human speech, but getting it just slightly wrong. And I remember my partner walking away into the darkness with something that looked like a person, but moved like it was learning how to walk for the first time. The hardest part is not knowing what happened to him. Was he killed quickly, or did that thing keep him alive for a while, maybe trying to learn how to be him? Did it study his mannerisms, his voice, his memories, the way it seemed to be studying human behavior? Or am I just torturing myself with possibilities that are worse than the truth? There's another thought that keeps me awake at night, one I've never shared with anyone until now. What if that woman we found in the forest wasn't a victim at all? What if she was the thing that had been at the RV, the thing that made that frantic phone call? What if it had already learned how to mimic human speech well enough to fool 911 dispatch, but hadn't quite perfected the physical appearance yet? Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe the stress of that night damaged something in my brain that can't be fixed. Maybe every shadow I see hiding monsters is just my imagination trying to make sense of a senseless tragedy. Or maybe there really are things out there in the deep woods, things that have learned to walk among us, wearing our faces and speaking our words, but never quite getting it right. Things that hang old, bloody clothes from tree branches like trophies, things that can drag grown men out of their beds and into the darkness without leaving a trace. I don't go camping anymore. I don't hike alone, don't drive country roads after dark, don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize. If you're ever out in the woods at night and you come across someone who doesn't quite look right, whose smile is too wide and whose eyes reflect light like mirrors, don't try to help them. Don't let them walk away with you into the darkness. Just run as fast and as far as you can and don't look back. Because some things are better left in the shadows where they belong. And some faces are meant to stay with the people who were born wearing them. The case file is still open, technically. My partner is still listed as missing, the RV incident still unsolved. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has encountered whatever took him, if there are other reports filed away in dusty cabinets that describe similar incidents. But I don't look for them anymore. I don't want to know how many other people have walked into the woods and come back wearing different faces. There are things that are always watching, always learning, always looking for new shapes to wear, so be careful who you trust in the darkness, because you never know if the face looking back at you is the same one that person was born with, or if it's something else entirely, something that's just learning how to be human by watching us from the shadows. And if you're ever a cop responding to a call about strange voices in remote areas, about people trying to break into isolated homes with claws instead of hands, remember my story. Remember that some cases aren't meant to be solved, and some missing persons are better off staying missing. That's my story. That's what happened the night my partner disappeared. Make of it what you will, believe it or don't. But if you ever find yourself alone in the woods at night and you hear voices that sound almost but not quite human, remember what I told you. And whatever you do, don't let it follow you home. For more interesting stories, check this out.